called Win the Day. We've been in this series since Easter. We're going to wrap it up today. And all throughout this series, we've been saying really this. Every single one of us has future hopes, dreams, and desires. There are things in your life that you hope for, things in your life that you aspire to become one day, things in your life that you've been desiring or longing for quite a while. And we've just said that your future you, right, is largely dependent on your daily you. In fact, if we were to look at the way that you live each day of your life, we could probably predict some things about your future career. We could probably predict some things about your future education. We could probably predict some things about your future relationships. We could probably even predict some things about your future finances and your future retirement. Just your future year is largely dependent on your daily year, you. And we just said, hey, if we want to experience the future that we desire, we have to win the day. Right? We have to, at least most days, we have to win the day. Now, as we jump into things this morning, I just want to tell you, there was a season of my life where I was really focused on a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this series, and I was really focused on trying to make the most of every single day in a way that I hadn't before, at least not in a while. It was about 7 years ago, and I found that I wasn't winning the day particularly in the morning. Anybody ever feel that way? Like the morning is the part of the day that you lose the most consistently. And the reason I found myself losing the most consistently is I found myself snoozing consistently. So there was a time of the day that I wanted to wake up at, and I was trying to wake up earlier than I had been. And I was just setting the alarm clock, right? And every morning I would wake up, and every morning I would just smack that beautiful button, which quite honestly, I don't like who invented the snooze button. I don't know. Why? I'm not sure, but like they made all of us worse people. You know what I mean? Like the moment that they created that. And so I would just smack the snooze. Now, I did what most people tell you to do when you're having a hard time waking up with your alarm clock. And if anybody else ever done this, I moved it across the room. You ever tried this before? I just moved it across the room, okay? And that, I'll tell you, that worked for like a day. And then I remembered that my room's not that big. Okay? And my bed's not that far. And so then, for weeks, I would just get up and I would walk across the room, all 10 feet, and I would hit snooze, hit snooze again. And I would crawl right back in bed, and I might even do that 2 or 3 times. And so then I got frustrated by that. In fact, I got so frustrated by that one day. I was so mad. Like I finally had gotten up, I'd gotten ready, and I was still mad at myself. You ever get frustrated with yourself for not doing the thing that you had planned to do, right? So frustrated with myself that I literally went and I broke the snooze button on my alarm clock. I was like, I'm just going to rip it out. And so I took my key, I popped it underneath of the thing and ripped the snooze button out of it entirely. And so the next day I went to bed that night and woke up the next morning. And quite honestly, it worked for about a week. And then I realized you can reset the time on the alarm clock. And so then I was just getting up every day and I would go and I would walk 10 feet across the room and I would turn off the alarm. And then I would set the alarm for 10 minutes later. Like I'd go through the process. And then I would turn it on again. And I would walk 10 feet back to my bed, and I would crawl right back in it. And I wasn't actually, all of this effort that I was taking to make my mornings better weren't making my mornings better at all. They were just making them harder, and yet I was still just getting to the same place. And it turns out, and this is going to be shocking for maybe some of you, it turns out the problem wasn't the alarm clock. The problem was me. Now, you've experienced this in some way, shape, form, or area of your life, right? Some of us, you've got the best gym membership that you've never been to, For some of us, you've got like a Lifetime Fitness in your basement, and but you convinced yourself, you say, hey, if I get the right stuff, I'll do the right things. For some of us, right, you like wiped out your fridge of all the foods that you promised yourself that you were never going to eat again, right? And yet somehow those foods maybe didn't show up in your fridge, but somehow they showed up in your diet. You did all of the right things, and yet you still found yourself back in the same spot. Some of us have tried to quit things before. You tried to quit smoking at some point. You ripped up or threw out all of your cigarettes, right? You got rid of every single thing, and yet somehow, weeks later, you found yourself holding one. Again, some of us, you found yourself trying to just stop looking at things that you feel like aren't helpful to you, and you say, hey, I need to stop looking at this and consuming this content and looking at this information. You actually put blockers on your phone or blockers on your laptop, right? You actually got someone to ask you about the things that you're looking at, and yet somehow you find yourself still looking at the things that you told yourself you never would, and you did all the right things, and yet you still somehow found a way to get back to the place that you promised yourself that you would never go. Now, there's a word that we use for this in life, right? A word we use all the time, and you are familiar with it. In fact, anybody want to guess the word that we use for these kinds of moments, these kinds of things that keep driving our behavior? What's the word for that? Anybody want to guess? Nobody wants to guess. It's really simple. Habits, okay? There we go. Habits. We have habits in our life, right? In fact, we even say, help me out here, we say we are a creature of habit, right? Things that just drive your life seemingly on autopilot, things that you don't even think about, you just find yourself doing. And habits, quite honestly, habits can be helpful in so many ways. I mean, you don't think about how to drive to work, or you don't think about how to drive your kids to school every day because it's a habit for you. You don't think about how to take a shower when you're taking a shower because it's a habit for you. Habits can be so helpful in so many ways, and yet also habits can also be hurtful for us in some ways. And I would just say, as we kind of kick off this morning, I would just say this, that your daily habits are perfectly designed. I mean, perfectly to the nth degree designed for the life that you're currently living. Every piece of your life, in some way, shape, or form, is connected to the habits that you have. And your life today is perfectly an outcome of the habits that you have. So your habits, or your life is perfect outcome for the habits you have. And your habits are perfectly designed, there we go, for the life that you're experiencing. Now, which means that if your life is perfect in every way, shape, or form, nothing that we're going to talk about today applies to you. And so moms, you could probably just go ahead and leave, honestly, because I think you're in good shape, But if there's any piece of your life this morning that you find yourself longing for change in, right? Any piece of you, in one way, shape, or form, it is directly connected to or will fall back into your daily habits. If you're trying to change your financial future or your financial status or the state of your current finances, in some way, shape, or form, it's going to get connected back to your daily spending habits. If you're trying to change a relationship in your life in one way, shape, or form, it's going to come back to your habits. If there's a shift in your career that you're trying to make, in some way, shape, or form, it's going to connect back to your habits. Even your spiritual life, if there's a piece of your spiritual life that you're trying to grow in or shift or change or mature in, it's going to come back to your habits. And so if we're going to build the lives that we desire, we have to understand how habits work. And we have to become more aware of how habits drive our life. Now, there's a book that I read about 10 years ago by a guy named Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit. And he breaks down habits in this beautiful way that's so simple, yet so clear. And some of you may even be familiar with his work. His work's actually inspired some other works that you may have seen as well. Charles Duhigg talks about this. He talks about the habit loop. This is the thing that drives every habit in your life and in my life. And he says that every habit that you have in your life begins in some way, shape, or form with a cue. A cue is like a trigger. It's the thing that sets you into motion for the habit. A cue is almost always a person, a place, or an event that takes place. So in my life, right, 7 years ago, cue, alarm clock goes off. That's going to trigger a habit for me, right? Cue, I walked into a donut shop. That's going to cue a trigger, a habit for me, right? It's going to trigger in some way, shape, or form something in your life. And the cue is always going to trigger a routine for you. The routine is the thing that you typically call the habit. The routine is the thing that you just do second nature. The routine is the thing that you're not even cognizant of in the moment, and then you look back on and recognize it, right? But the cue is going to trigger a routine, and the routine is always going to lead you to a reward that you crave or you desire, right? So for me, 7 years ago, cue, alarm clock goes off. Routine, reset alarm clock. Reward, go back to Sleepy Town real fast, And so for me, the cue, the alarm clock goes off, it instantly triggers a craving for the reward. And the routine is the shortest path to the reward, right? Cue, walk into donut shop. Routine, buy donut. Reward, enjoy donut. I walk into the donut shop, I'm instantly craving the donut in that moment, and then I can't help myself but to go through the routine in that moment. Now you have examples of this in your life as well. You could probably look at different things, and some of these are good routines, good habit loops that you've created in your life. In fact, some of you have a routine where you wake up, the moment you wake up, you get ready and you head out the door to the gym, or you head out the door to go run, right? And you've done that. Your cue, you've taken that cue of an alarm clock, created a reward, which is the satisfaction that you experience after working out, and you've built a healthy routine in that place. Others of us have different habit loops, right, that drive our behavior in different ways. For some of us, the cue is different, right? The cue might be a place that you go. The cue might be a place that you drive by. The cue might be a person you hear from who makes you feel a certain way. The cue could be so many different things, but it triggers a craving for a reward, and the routine is almost always the path that you have learned to go through to get to the reward. Now, research suggests this, which is interesting, right? Research suggests, if you look at all the research from all the different studies, almost all of them are going to tell you that about 40 to 50% of your actions every single day come by habits, not by intention in the moment, not by an active decision in the moment, but 40 to 50% of your decisions throughout the day or actions throughout the day come as a result of the habits that you have created and developed in your life. True for you, true for me, true for all of us, which means that your average day doesn't look like this. Your average day looks more like this, right? It's just a sequence of habits and habit loops that you've developed in your life. You wake up, the alarm clock goes off, it cues a habit. You get dressed for work and you walk out the door, it cues a habit. You walk into the office place and sit down at your laptop, it cues a habit. You will come home from work and you walk in the door, it cues a habit loop. You put the kids to bed and you walk out of their bedroom for the 5th time, but the last time. And it cues a habit, right? You lay down in your bed and it cues a habit. About half of your day is driven by loops of habit that you've created in your life. Now, some of these, maybe even most of these in your life, we'd refer to very simply as good habits. These are things that you've worked hard to create or things that you've just kind of stumbled into. They've just become natural patterns for you, and they bring healthy results with them, right? They're just good habits for you. But there's other moments in your day that you and I could look at, pinpoint. We could even make a list of them right now, right? Other moments in your day that you and I would just define very simply, but we just define them as like bad habits. Things that you wish you didn't do in your day, and yet you still find yourself driven or compelled on a daily basis to do them. Now, what's frustrating about this is you and I both, and I could give you my list, right? We have these moments, and we do everything that we can to eliminate those kinds of habit loops from our day. And yet we wake up the next day, and we find ourselves right back in the same habit loops over and over and over again. In fact, breaking a bad habit in many ways kind of feels like trying to cancel a subscription service that you keep calling for, you know what I mean? Like you keep calling it and you keep canceling it, and yet for some reason or another, they keep charging you for it. You know, like when we moved into our house about a year ago, we bought a house about a year ago, moved in, and we'd been in for about a week, and I woke up one morning and I looked out the front door, and there was somebody spraying the grass around the trees in our lawn. I'm like, I don't know who this guy is, but I don't think he's supposed to be here, you know? And so I'm in my pajamas, and I'm like walking out front. I'm like, hey, like, what you doing, you know? And he's like, well, you know, we're a lawn care company, and we service this yard. And I'm like, no, you don't. You know, he's like, what do we do? So I'm like, okay, I got it. I assume it's tied to the previous owner or whatever. So I sent an email, okay? Good, taken care of, should be done. 2 weeks later, I look out my window. There's somebody spraying trees in my yard. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? I'm supposed to be here. I make another contact. They're like, hey, should be taken care of. 3 weeks later, I come home from work. There's a note on the door that said my lawn had just been sprayed for mosquitoes. Now that I was happy about, you know? I was actually okay with that one in the moment. But again, I'm like, okay, thank you, but I'm not paying for this. And I contacted them again, right? Like that's what trying to break a bad habit feels like, except in this case, it's your heart calling your head saying, hey, we'd like to unsubscribe from all of your terrible decision-making, you know? And your brain's like, yup, got it. We're canceling that right now. And then the next day, the very next day, it charges you all over again. Now, these moments for you and for me, right, they create this cycle of emotion that I would just say, at least for me, is frustration followed by hope, right? Because it happens again, and I'm frustrated that it happened again. Whatever the thing is, I've been trying to break it. It happens. I'm so frustrated that it happened, right? I ate the thing. I did the thing. I said the thing, whatever. You're so frustrated by it. But then very quickly, it turns into hope because it feels like the ability to change it should be very small. If I would just do this one thing, and I can do this one thing, everything would be better. And so frustration turns to hope really quickly. And then another day comes by, and frustration sets in all over again. And eventually, I find myself asking the question that I'm sure that all of us have asked at some point in our day. I say, am I really in control of my own life? Am I actually the one at the steering wheel here? Am I actually the one who's driving my decisions? Because I feel like I've made these decisions to move in a different direction, and yet I still find myself in the same rut and the same pattern over and over and over again. Now, what's interesting about this is that a few thousand years ago, there was a writer by the name of Paul, one of the earliest leaders in the Christian church. And he actually was talking about this feeling that we feel so often. And he actually gave a word to it. Like he actually gave like a word picture to it that captured it so well for the people that he was writing to a couple thousand years ago. Now, I'll just kind of tell you, I'll even warn you, the word that he gives to it is a word that you and I often actually avoid in life. In fact, we've actually worked so hard as a society to eliminate and eradicate the institution of this, that anytime that we see it or we're confronted with it, we're actually like appalled by it and repelled by it. In fact, some of us in the room, maybe you've actually seen this in action, or you have family members who have experienced this in some way, shape, or form, and you could probably tell us even more about what this looks like for us in our life. And this might even mean more for you. But for Paul, when he wrote these words, it was actually a really fitting word picture to the people that he was writing to, because it's actually something that was still a part of their society in that day and something that they saw on a regular basis. And the word that Paul gives to this feeling for us is this. He calls it enslavement. He says it feels as if you are actually enslaved to something that is driving your decisions and taking control of your life. In fact, look at the way that he wrote this to some of the first followers of Jesus in Rome. He said, "Don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey?" In other words, he's like, hey, at one point, you chose to hit the snooze button. At one point, you chose to skip class. At one point, you chose to eat the donut. At one point, you chose the cigarette. At one point, you chose the fifth drink. At one point, you chose to open the app. At one point, you chose to go to that website. But in time, you lost your ability to choose. And you actually became enslaved by the thing that you once chose for yourself. It's like at one time, you opened the door and you freely walked through it. But at some point along the way, something else snuck around behind you and locked the door behind you. What Paul's talking about here, it isn't forced slavery. What he's talking about is choiced slavery. That you've become enslaved by the very choices that you've made. Now, we often look at moments like this in our life, and the thing that we crave, the thing we desire, the thing we drive for, as a result of this or in response to this, is independence. Like our goal is actually to free ourselves from this. In fact, you would even expect Paul in this moment to then talk about freedom and how to free yourselves from this enslavement, free yourselves from this control over your life, but he doesn't. In fact, Paul actually writes as if you will always be enslaved to something, and he even says that all of our choices lead us in one of two directions, to be enslaved by at least one of two things. He puts it all in two categories. He says you will always be enslaved by or controlled by one of two things. He says this, he says you can be a slave to sin, which leads to death. In the New Testament, sin is anything that pulls you away from the way that your Creator designed you to live. And he says, when you allow yourself to be pulled away by anything that leads, or that anything that leads you in a way of living that's not how you were designed, it actually leads you to a point of just having the life sucked out of you. He says you can be a slave to things that suck the life out of you. Or, he says, you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living, which leads you to the way that you were created and designed to live in partnership with your Heavenly Father. Now, Paul reiterates this idea a couple of times throughout his letter. And then after he reiterates it a couple of times, he actually calls people to make a change in their life. He says, previously you let yourselves be slaves to impurity and lawlessness, which led you even deeper, ever deeper into sin. In fact, the grooves got deeper every time you drove through them. It got harder to get out every time you went that way. Right? He says, now you must give yourselves to be slaves to give yourselves, next section, to be slaves to righteous living so that you will become holy. He says the goal here isn't independence. The goal here is to actually hand yourself over to a better master, a better leader, a better ruler for you in order to become the person that you were created to be. He says stop digging new grooves in this moment. He says give yourselves to a better master. And here's the thing, and you've experienced this, you know this to be true. Every moment of your day is in service to something. Every moment of your day, from the moment you wake up, to the moment you walk into the kitchen, to the moment you get into the car, to the moment you get to work or to school or wherever you go, to the moment you come home, to the moment you have dinner, to the moment you put the kids to bed, to the moment you sit down on the couch for the first time all day, to the moment you lay down in bed. Every single moment of your day is in service to something. And Paul says, hey, the goal isn't independence. The goal is to make sure that you're putting yourself in service to the right things. Let me ask you this. Is there any part of your day that needs a new master? No. The way that we create new masters or new rulers or new leaders in our life is the very same way we created the old ones. We create habits in the direction of a new master or a new ruler, right? So if we're going to create the right kind of direction in our life, we have to engage the habit loop, but intentionally this time, not to become like accidental, habitual leaders of our life, right? Not to just fall into grooves, but actually create the right grooves that we desire in our life. Now, there's a ton of research about how to actually engage your habit loop. There's a ton of resources about that. Charles Duhigg has a great book, The Power of Habit. James Clear has a great book, Atomic Habits. Craig Rochelle has a great book, The Power to Change. All of these designed to help you engage the habit loop in your life. But just really quickly, let's just summarize a few ways that we can do this. And we'll talk about how we can start habits, how we can stop habits in the direction that we desire to go. Let's talk about starting a new habit, right? All the research is going to point you in this way, in one way, shape, or form. If you want to start a new habit, you got to do at least 3 things. You got to first identify a cue. A cue in your life is the thing in your life that already exists that you're going to build a habit based off of. If you say you're going to start working out, you don't just say, I'm going to start working out at some point tomorrow. You decide when you're going to work out. And it's not just a time of day, it's after you do something, right? When my alarm clock goes off, I'm going to work out. After I brush my teeth, I'm going to work out. After I get home from school, I'm going to work out. Whenever it is, you attach it to a cue. Not just an idea, but a specific moment or a specific event that happens in your day. Second thing we have to do, we have to simplify the routine. You're going to make it as easy as possible to build a new groove in your life. This is why I sleep in my gym clothes, okay? It doesn't matter what season of year it is. I sleep in my gym clothes on the nights that I know I'm going to the gym the next day. Because if I don't, okay, I wake up in a state of going right back to bed, you know? If I sleep in my gym clothes, I mean, like with the silicone wedding ring and everything ready to go, because I'm preparing myself and making it as easy as possible for me in the morning. You got to simplify the routine. The last thing you have to do is create a reward. Now, you don't really create rewards. You just identify the thing that you already want. You can't just create a new desire in your life. You identify something that you crave, something that you desire, and you put it as your fulfillment to that reward. That can be anything from the feeling of satisfaction that you get from going to the gym, the feeling of peace that you get from engaging in daily quiet time, the feeling that you get from going on date night with your wife once a week, the feeling that you get in any moment, right? It could be whatever you want. It could be a feeling. It could be a physical reward. It could be, hey, when I finish working out, I'm going to get a milkshake. Don't recommend it, but you could do it. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it is, you got to actually create a reward for that routine in your life that you're going to crave the moment you experience that cue. That's how we start new habits in our life. What's harder to do is actually stopping habits. Well, the hardest thing for us is actually to put habits to bed for the last time, to fully unsubscribe from the choices that we've been making. Let me give you at least 3 ways that we can actually stop habits in our life. The first thing you can do, and you don't have to do all of these, you just have to do at least one of these, right? First thing we can do is eliminate the cue. To actually eliminate the thing that cues us to step into the habit from our life. Now, the cue is almost always a person, a place, or a thing that triggers a routine of behavior for you. Now, eliminating a cue can feel extreme in certain moments. But yet Jesus actually kind of modeled this or shared a thought around this for us. Look at what Jesus said about this. He actually said, listen, if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, he didn't say turn a different direction. Hey, call someone and tell them to ask you about that once a week. He says, no. He goes, gouge it out and throw it away. Get rid of it. He goes, and if your hand, even your strong hand, your dominant hand, in my case, my right hand, right, causes you to sin, I don't say tie it behind your back. He says, cut it off and throw it away. Or today, we might say, if your phone, which is practically attached to your body, causes you to make decisions that you don't want to be making, or causes you to look at things that you don't want to be looking at, or causes you to fall into a pattern of behavior that you regret every time that you fall into that pattern of behavior, cut it off. Give it to someone else at a certain time of day. Or if a certain person in your life triggers a way of living for you that you don't want to engage with, and you've been trying to hold on to the relationship with them while also trying to live in a different way, but they keep triggering a way of behavior for you, cut them off, at least for a season. Why? Because your life, the entirety of your life, is worth more than that moment. It's worth more than that thing. it's worth more than that friendship. And if you don't, it will continue to lead you in a direction that you don't intend to go. We've got to, or we at least can, eliminate the cue. Stop. A habit. The second thing we can do is actually replace the routine, right? We can try to replace the routine. In fact, Charles Duhigg calls this the golden rule of habit change. He says you can't break a habit, but you can change a habit by replacing the routine. So in this case, we're actually keeping the same cue. We're keeping the same reward, but you're finding a different way to go about experiencing it, right? So for some of us, right, the cue is stress. When I feel the emotion of stress in my life, this is the routine that I go in to find myself peaceful. For some of us, it leads us into a substance. For some of us, it leads us into like Netflix and just like binge watching, right? For some of us, it leads us into some form of escaping that gives us the reward of some kind of temporary peace. And Duhigg would say, hey, replace the routine. Keep the same cue. You can't change. The cue is the cue, right? And engage the reward, but put a different routine in that place. For some of us, that might be, hey, I'm going to actually turn on worship music the moment that I feel stressed, and actually allow that to be the routine that leads me to a place of peace. For others, it might be, hey, I'm going to open up Scripture and turn to a certain page, and I'm going to engage with that for a few minutes as my routine the moment that I feel stressed to lead me to the reward of peace, but not in the way that I've been doing it, but to find a different rhythm and a different habit for doing it, right? Now, the third thing we can do, right, at the end of this, we can actually try to change the reward. And this is particularly important if the thing that you're craving is actually the very thing that's unhealthy for you. Now, I will tell you that most habit research actually doesn't even talk about this because scientifically, like logically, this isn't even really on the table. In fact, it's kind of the hardest thing to do. Changing your cravings is one of the hardest things to do. And yet, your Heavenly Father wants to step into moments like this with you. And he doesn't want to just change your behavior. In fact, he's less worried about your behavior. What he actually cares most about is your heart, your desires, the things that you long for. And he actually wants to step into this with you and change the things that you've been viewing as your reward, the things that you desire, the things that you crave. In fact, the Apostle Paul, in one of his letters to some of the earliest Christians, said this. He said, work hard to show the results of your salvation. He says, obeying God with deep reverence and fear, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. Your Heavenly Father actually wants to partner with you in the process of changing your habits, to not just change your behaviors, but to actually change your heart and change the things that you long for in your life. But how do we partner with him? It's like Paul said just a verse ago, by obeying the things that he calls us to obey, by actually stepping into new rhythms of living and building new grooves in our mind and building new grooves in our heart that lead us towards a different desire. And in time, as we actually engage our habits in life, in time, you and I continue to find that your habits establish your master. Your habits are actually the thing that determine what rules you, what drives you, and what compels you. And so we ought to choose them well. Now, we wrap up this morning. I just want to take a second. I want to talk to a kind of a certain group of people in the room this morning. Particularly if you find yourself right now in your early 20s or in your teens. If you find yourself in middle school, high school, or like early 20s. Let's just say this. I think this conversation, you've got one of the greatest opportunities in the room right now. This is I would say, like, this is like this equally, everything we're talking about equally applies to everybody in the room, but not all of us have the same opportunity in the room this morning. And the reason is, at this stage of life, there's something that people have said to you probably, I'd be willing to bet. They've said this about you and about the way that your body is and the way that your mind is right now. And they've said to you, hey, they've said, your mind isn't fully developed yet. Now, they said that, and they kind of meant it like an insult, or at least you took it as an insult, right? You're like, yeah, like it was like a put down, or like, hey, you're not wise enough, or whatever, like you're not fully developed. I'm not saying that to you this morning as an insult. I mean that as an opportunity. Because you're in a season of life right now where you are actually establishing grooves in your mind and patterns of living for your life that are going to put yourself under the rule of one thing or another. And you're in a position right now to establish your master and establish your habits in a way that no one else in this room is biologically able to or equipped to do right now. And the reason that people care so much about the choices that you make right now is not because they don't trust you wholeheartedly, whatever. The reason they care so much is they know that the choices that you're making now, the patterns that you're creating within yourself right now, are setting the direction of your life in a way that is going to be so much harder to change 10 years from now than it is today. And one of the best things that you could do for you is to be mindful of and intentional about the patterns that you establish for yourself, the habits that you allow yourself to not fall into, but to form, and actually choose right now what direction your habits are going to send your life and under whose rule or whose reign or whose authority your habits are going to place you, because they will enslave you to something. And you get to choose who they enslave you to. And I believe if you're intentional with this season of life right now, if you will choose the habits that you put in place or allow to fall into place right now, you are going to spare yourself regret in ways that people in this room would tell you they wish they had been more intentional in their teens and their 20s about. You're going to spare yourself things that you're going to would otherwise spend decades unwinding. Even people in this room would tell you that there are patterns that they established in their life in their 20s, that they are now in their 50s and still trying to unwind and shift and to change. And if you can leverage this season now, it will shape the direction of your life in a way that you will never have the opportunity to shape it again. And you'll find that your habits establish your master in a way that sets you up for success, that your peers don't have, and that your peers in a few years look at you and long for. So, let me pray for us, then we'll wrap up our time together. Jesus, I thank you for the ways that you gave Paul words for us years ago that still speak to us as if they were written for us today, because they were. God, I thank you for the ways that you challenge us by them. I thank you for the ways that you call us into new levels of awareness through them. God, for those of us in the room this morning who find ourselves trying to escape a pattern of living that we have fallen into, we've unintentionally developed for ourselves, or maybe we chose at one point and now wish we could unchoose. God, would you help us to lean into you in a way that maybe we haven't before? Would you help us to trust you with the future of our life, maybe even more than we trusted you with our life in the past? God, for those of us in the room who find ourselves craving things and desiring things that we know are unhealthy for us and that we wish we could escape, God, would you help us to lean into you? Would you give us a new craving and a new desire? God, for those of us who need to eliminate something from our life, would you give us the courage to make a bold decision, to do something extreme for the sake of our future? God, would you show us the habits you would have us to make? God, ultimately, would you help us to place our lives under your full control? Would you help us to surrender? Would you help us to submit? Would you help us to trust your ways over our desires? Would you lead us into the life, the abundant life that you promise for us? Jesus, we thank you for this. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.